Hello everyone and welcome to my channel YNR Trends. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Jack Abbott had survived corporate wars, romantic disasters, family betrayals, and enough personal turmoil to fill several lifetimes, but nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for the horrifying scene unfolding before his eyes as he burst into the old cabin on the outskirts of Genoa City. A place that had once been a peaceful retreat, but had recently become the epicenter of the chaos surrounding Matt's unraveling secrets, Nikki's dangerous involvement, and Victor's refusal to reveal what he truly knew. Jack heard Nikki's screams before he even kicked the front door open, her voice hoarse, ragged, and echoing with an unmistakable mixture of terror and despair as flames roared up the wooden walls and danced like devils across the ceiling, casting monstrous shadows that made everything in the room feel twisted, unreal, and nightmarish. Jack's heart pounded so violently he could hear it in his ears, but he didn't hesitate for a single second. Not when Nikki Newman, a woman he had loved, fought for, and cared about in ways he never fully admitted even to himself, was trapped inside. Nor when he saw Matt, unconscious, sprawled near the collapsing staircase, smoke swirling around him like a serpent ready to devour him. The heat blistered Jack's skin instantly, the air thick with choking smoke that burned his lungs, but the only thing that mattered was saving them both, even though he could tell from the way the flames curled around Matt's motionless body that he had only minutes, maybe seconds, before the entire structure went down in an explosive collapse that would destroy everything and everyone inside. Nikki's eyes widened in disbelief as Jack charged through the flames, her trembling hands reaching toward him as if he were some kind of miracle sent at the last possible moment, a guardian she had not expected. Especially not after the recent tensions and arguments between them, arguments fueled by Victor's cryptic warnings, by Matt's dangerous missteps, by the growing suspicion that the young man's ties to a darker criminal network were far more complex and deadly than they had anticipated, and by the horrifying possibility that Nikki herself had become a pawn in someone's ruthless game. Coughing violently, her face streaked with soot, her hair wild and singed at the ends, Nikki collapsed against Jack as soon as he reached her. But Jack held her up, steadying her the way he had so many times in the past, the familiarity of her weight against him, igniting a burst of determination that cut through the disorientation of the smoke, reminding him that he was not just fighting the fire. He was fighting fate, tragedy, and the relentless Newman Abbott curse that seemed to haunt them every few years. Jack? Matt, he's still over there. Nikki gasped, pointing with a shaking hand toward the far corner of the room where the flames were thickest, and Jack felt a cold, visceral dread crawl up his spine as he saw the truth for himself. Matt lying unconscious, one arm bent at a terrible angle, his face pale beneath a mask of ash, his chest rising only barely beneath the flickering light as debris crackled and fell dangerously close to him. Instinct screamed at Jack to get Nikki out first, to drag her to safety in return for Matt. Afterward, but something deeper, something moral, something stubbornly Jack Abbott refused to choose between them. Refused to let any of this end with more death, more heartbreak, more years of guilt for Nikki or anyone else tied to this twisted wildfire of secrets that had ignited around Matt ever since he had arrived in Genoa City under the guise of needing help, when in reality he had been running from a past so dark that Victor himself had seemed shaken upon uncovering pieces of it. Jack pulled Nikki toward the exit, shouting for her to keep low as the ceiling groaned ominously overhead, flames snapping at his back like frantic wolves. But just as he reached the threshold, Nikki pushed herself away from him with more force than he expected, her eyes wide with a mix of desperation and stubbornness that he recognized instantly, as the very same expression she wore decades ago when she fought like hell for the people she loved. "No, Jack. I'm not leaving him. I can't. He saved me earlier. Please don't let him die," she cried, and before Jack could argue, before he could even fully process how Nikki still had the strength to defy death itself, she stumbled back into the burning room toward Matt, coughing violently as more smoke filled her lungs. Jack cursed under his breath, charging after her just as a burning beam crashed down where she had been standing seconds earlier, a stark reminder that any hesitation, any misstep, would cost them all their lives. He grabbed her around the waist before she collapsed again, dragging both her and Matt's limp, heavy body toward the exit, his muscles screaming in agony as he lifted Matt over his shoulder while supporting Nikki with his free arm. The overwhelming weight a brutal reminder that Jack was not in his 20s anymore, nor even his 40s, but none of that mattered. Not when the floorboards were growing softer beneath his feet, Not when flames licked at the walls like hungry beasts. Not when the roar of the fire was so loud it drowned out everything except Nikki's weak sobs and Jack's own racing heartbeat. Outside, the cold night air hit them like a slap as Jack stumbled into the clearing surrounding the cabin, Nikki collapsing beside him while he lowered Matt carefully to the ground, checking for a pulse with frantic urgency. For one horrifying moment Jack felt nothing, no rise of breath, no heartbeat, and Nikki's anguished scream tore through the night as she covered her mouth, her entire body shaking as she stared at the still, soot-covered young man who had become a complicated figure in her life, one tied to secrets she had barely begun to understand, secrets that threatened everything she and Victor had built. But then, just as the fire behind them cracked in a violent explosion, Jack felt the faintest flutter of movement beneath his fingers, a shallow but unmistakably present heartbeat, and he shouted for Nikki to stay awake as she slumped sideways, exhausted and disoriented. The sound of approaching sirens cut through the chaos as the cabin fully ignited behind them, flames shooting into the sky like a final warning that whatever Matt had been caught up in, whatever he had been hiding, was far from over. As paramedics rushed toward them, Jack stayed by Nikki's side, holding her trembling hand and whispering that she was safe, that he had her, that he wasn't going anywhere, not now, not ever. While fire crews swarmed around the still unconscious Matt, whose fate now rested in the hands of whatever truth he carried, whatever danger he had brought with him, and whatever secrets he might reveal if he survived. But as Jack watched the medics work on Matt, watched Nikki struggle to stay conscious, watched the cabin burn down to nothing but smoldering ruins, he couldn't shake the chilling realization that saving Nikki and Matt tonight might have prevented one tragedy, but had awakened another far more dangerous storm, one that would soon sweep through Genoa City with a force powerful enough to tear apart families, expose long-buried truths, and reignite old rivalries that had never fully died, leaving Jack, Nikki, Victor, and everyone connected to them standing on the precipice of a mystery darker and deadlier than any of them were prepared for. As the last flames of the collapsing cabin hissed under the assault of the firefighters' hoses, Jack felt a crushing weight settle on his chest, not only from the smoke still clawing at his lungs but from the chilling realization that what happened inside that burning cabin tonight was merely the first spark of something far bigger, far darker, and far more explosive than anyone in Genoa City had anticipated. Nikki lay on the cold ground beside him, trembling violently as paramedics wrapped her in blankets, her face streaked with soot and tears, her breath shallow but steady, yet her eyes, those familiar blue eyes that had seen decades of tragedy and survival, were filled with a terror Jack had not seen since the days of her worst battles with her past, and as she clutched Jack's hand, refusing to let go even as medics urged her toward the ambulance, she whispered with a shaky voice, "Jack, you don't understand. Matt wasn't supposed to be there. He wasn't supposed to find out." Words that sent a chill down Jack's spine because they hinted at layers upon layers of secrets buried beneath the surface, secrets that Nikki had been carrying alone, secrets Victor had been hiding behind that stoic stare and cold command of his, secrets Jack suspected were tied not only to Matt's mysterious arrival in town, but to the shadowy threats Victor had been dodging for months, threats he refused to disclose even to the people closest to him. As they lifted Matt onto a stretcher, his face pale beneath the oxygen mask, Jack stepped closer, staring down at the young man who had plunged so deeply into Nikki's life, into Victor's world, into the Newman orbit that pulled in trouble like a magnet, and he couldn't shake the nagging question burrowing deeper into his gut. Who was Matt truly running from? Because Jack had seen fear before, hell, he had lived through it, but the look he had glimpsed in Matt's eyes earlier that day, when the young man had sensed someone following him near Crimson Lights, had not been the fear of a guilty man trying to hide his crimes. It had been the terror of prey hunted by something merciless, something unrelenting, something powerful enough to push him to hide in cabins, to drag Nikki into danger, to risk everything simply to stay one step ahead. Nikki coughed violently as paramedics lifted her onto another stretcher, and Jack moved beside her immediately, gripping her hand again, refusing to let her feel alone in the chaos unraveling around her, but she tugged weakly at his arm, eyes wide with desperation. "Jack, don't let Victor spin this, don't let him bury it, promise me," she pleaded, and the weight of her request hit him like a hammer because it wasn't often Nikki Newman asked him, not Victor, not her children, but him, to protect her from Victor's control. Jack squeezed her hand gently, promising he wouldn't let anything be swept under the rug, that he wouldn't let Matt's suffering or Nikki's involvement be turned into some corporate chess piece in the Newman empire. But deep down he knew Victor was already moving behind the scenes, already contacting his people, already shaping the narrative before Matt had even reached the hospital. The night sky flickered with the last embers of the cabin as Jack climbed into the ambulance. Beside Nikki, ignoring the paramedics' protests because he knew nothing would pull him away from her. Not when she had almost died, not when she was still shaking, not when danger was still circling them like a predator. The ride to the hospital felt eternal, every bump sending a jolt through Nikki's fragile body, every coughing fit stabbing at Jack's already frayed nerves, and when they finally arrived, the chaos of the emergency room swallowed them whole. Bright lights, urgent voices, alarms. Beeping, nurses rushing past as they wheeled Nikki into a trauma bay while Matt was rushed to another room with a swarm of specialists surrounding him, his survival hanging by a thread. Jack paced the hallway like a man possessed, running a hand through his soot-covered hair, replaying the fire, Nikki's fear, Matt's unconscious body, and the gut-twisting moment he thought he might lose them both, and it wasn't long before he heard the familiar, thunderous footsteps approaching, Victor Newman. His expression carved in stone, his eyes blazing with fury not at the fire, not at the destruction, but at the fact that he had not been in control of what happened. "What the hell were you doing at that cabin, Jack?" Victor demanded, not bothering with greetings, not even looking at Jack as he shoved past him toward the trauma rooms. But Jack caught his arm, forcing Victor to stop and face him, and for a moment the two men stood chest to chest, their decades of rivalry simmering between them like a second wildfire. "Nikki almost died tonight, Victor. She was trapped. Matt was unconscious. That place was ready to explode," Jack said, his voice low, steady, but vibrating with restrained anger, and Victor's stare flicked slightly, the faintest flash of fear showing through his mask as he asked, "Is Nikki awake? Is she talking?" A question that told Jack everything he needed to know. Victor wasn't worried about what happened, he was worried about what Nikki might have revealed, what secrets he feared might slip from her lips in a moment of pain or confusion. Jack stepped closer, lowering his voice. "What have you dragged her into this time? What did Matt know that made someone try to kill him? Why was Nikki involved? And don't you dare tell me this was some random accident." But Victor's expression hardened instantly, his jaw clenching as he growled, "Stay out of this, Jack. This is family business." An answer that only confirmed Jack's suspicions because Victor Newman never said family business unless something catastrophic was brewing, something he wanted to keep hidden behind those high Newman walls. Before Jack could press further, a doctor approached, looking exhausted and tense, and Victor immediately snapped, "How is my wife?" His voice booming across the hallway, but the doctor raised a hand calmly, saying Nikki was stable for now but suffering from smoke, inhalation, dehydration, and elevated stress levels, adding that she needed rest, oxygen, and monitoring to ensure there were no complications. Jack exhaled shakily at the news, but Victor barely reacted. Instead he asked, "And the boy? Matt?" A question so coldly phrased that even the doctor seemed taken aback before answering that Matt was still unconscious, suffering from severe smoke inhalation, potential lung damage, and a possible concussion, and though he had a pulse, they weren't yet certain he would wake up. Nikki's trauma room opened briefly as a nurse adjusted equipment, and Jack caught sight of her lying there, fragile, trembling, her eyes half open as she whispered his name. Needing comfort, stability, someone who wasn't trying to twist her reality, and he immediately pushed past Victor to go to her, sitting at her bedside and brushing a soot-stained lock of hair from her forehead while she squeezed his hand weakly. "Jack, don't let him bury this, don't let him cover for Matt or hide what Matt knows. He's in danger, and so am I," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper, and Jack felt an icy dread wrap around him again because if Nikki Newman, who had faced stalkers, kidnappers, cult leaders, and her own inner demons, was afraid, truly afraid, then whatever Matt was tied to was no small, petty secret but something that could topple reputations, destroy families, maybe even get more people killed. Victor stood outside the room, watching through the glass with a mixture of impatience and something darker, fear, guilt, anger, Jack couldn't tell, but his fist clenched when he saw Nikki holding Jack's hand, and for a moment the old rivalry flared back to life like dry kindling catching fire. Nurses moved around Nikki, adjusting her oxygen, checking her vitals, urging her to rest, but Nikki fought to stay awake long enough to whisper one last thing to Jack, clutching his hand with surprising strength. "Jack, don't trust anyone, not even the doctors, they might be connected, it's deeper than you think." And then her eyelids fluttered shut as medication eased her into a restless sleep, leaving Jack frozen beside her, horrified by her warning because he had heard paranoia before. But this was not paranoia. This was a woman who had seen something, heard something, learned something she wasn't supposed to know. Outside the room, Victor stormed toward Matt's section of the emergency wing, demanding answers, demanding privacy, demanding access to medical records before they could even be written. And Jack followed him at a distance, knowing he needed to hear anything Victor learned, anything Victor tried to hide. Moments later, a second doctor approached Victor and Jack, explaining that during the preliminary scan they had found something disturbing on Matt's body, something that didn't belong, something that couldn't be explained by the fire alone. And when the doctor hesitated, Victor barked, "Spit it out!" prompting the doctor to reveal they found signs of prior injuries, healed fractures, bruising patterns consistent with restraints, and a fresh incision mark near Matt's side, something surgical, recent, and likely connected to the reason Matt had been running. Jack felt his stomach drop and Victor's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, shock, then worry, then fury, as if someone had dared to harm someone he considered under his protection, yet also as if someone had now placed the Newman family in the crosshairs by targeting Matt. "He's running from someone," Jack said quietly, and the doctor nodded grimly, adding, "And whoever he's running from, they may not be done," before glancing pointedly toward the hallway windows as if expecting dangerous strangers to appear at any moment. Jack looked toward Matt's room and froze when he saw something that made his blood run cold. Through the glass, Matt's fingers twitched. Tiny, barely perceptible but unmistakably movement, and for a moment Jack held his breath, wondering if the young man was waking up. But the monitors suddenly spiked, alarms blaring, nurses rushing past Jack and Victor, shouting orders as Matt's oxygen saturation plummeted. His heart rate surged erratically, and his body convulsed under the restraints. As they worked furiously to stabilize him, Jack pressed a hand to the window, praying the young man would survive long enough to tell Nikki, Victor, and himself what truly happened, what he had been carrying, who was after him, and why someone had been willing to burn an entire cabin to the ground to keep him silent. But as Victor stepped forward, whispering something under his breath, something only Jack could partially hear, something that sounded eerily like, "If he wakes up, everything changes." Jack knew with a bone-deep certainty that whatever storm lay ahead had only just begun, and the fire they escaped tonight was nothing compared to the inferno of secrets, betrayals, and revelations waiting to erupt through Genoa City, threatening to pull Jack, Nikki, Victor, and everyone tied to Matt into a battle none of them were prepared to face. As Matt's monitors continued to scream through the hospital corridor, sending nurses scrambling and doctors shouting orders in a frantic effort to stabilize him, Jack stood frozen, his heart pounding with the heavy weight of realization that whatever was happening inside that trauma room was not merely a medical complication but the violent aftershock of the terror Matt had been living through long before the cabin fire. Victor's posture stiffened beside him, broad shoulders squared, jaw clenched so tightly a muscle twitched near his temple, and his eyes, usually ice-cold, calculating, controlled, now flickered with something far more volatile, fear wrapped in fury, a fear so deep that he wouldn't admit it even to himself, but Jack could see it, could feel it radiating off him like electricity as he watched the young man fighting for his life. The crash team wheeled in more equipment, a second doctor shouting that Matt's oxygen mask wasn't enough, that they needed to intubate, and, for a brief moment Jack thought he saw Matt's eyelids flutter, like he was trying to claw his way back to consciousness, to speak, to warn them. But then another spasm racked his body, and the medical team forced everyone back as they inserted the tube and adjusted the ventilator, trying desperately to regain control of his collapsing lungs. Victor took a step forward, his expression turning darker with every passing second, and finally he snapped. "What triggered this?" "He was stable when you brought him in." But the doctor didn't look away as he answered. "This isn't just smoke inhalation. Something else is happening inside his system, something we haven't identified yet." And those words chilled Jack to his core because they were too vague, too ominous, and too closely aligned with Nikki's breathless warning about trusting no one. Jack's mind raced back to the incision mark the doctor had mentioned earlier, the one that suggested a recent surgical procedure done outside a hospital setting, and he suddenly felt the full weight of the truth pressing down on him. Matt hadn't just been running from danger. He had already survived it, endured it, and carried the evidence on his body like a map of torment. As Matt's heart rate finally stabilized enough for the staff to calm, Jack noticed something on the floor beneath the window, something small, metallic, glinting under the harsh fluorescent lights, and when he crouched to pick it up, Victor snapped, "Leave it!" But Jack ignored him, It was a broken medical tag, bent and scorched from the fire, embossed with a partial serial code and the remnants of a logo Jack didn't recognize. Something that didn't belong to any Genoa City hospital or clinic, something foreign, dangerous, hidden. Victor cursed under his breath, snatching the tag from Jack's hand, stuffing it into his pocket as if it were combustible evidence, and Jack stepped closer, lowering his voice with barely contained anger. "What aren't you telling me, Victor? What kind of hell was Matt pulled into?" But Victor only shot him a deadly glare, murmuring, "This has nothing to do with you," before walking away, leaving Jack standing alone in the hallway, staring through the glass at Matt's motionless body, and feeling Nikki's warning echo through his mind, "Don't trust anyone," which only made the dread tighten in his chest as he realized that the real danger hadn't ended at the burning cabin. It had followed them straight into the hospital.